Did it ever cross your mind that Stitch didn't really care about family? That maybe the whole Ohana thing was just something it used as a part of its built-in genetic programming? And yes, Stitch is being called it for a reason. Stay until the end to find out why. Because it turns out that Stitch is not as adorable as you think. Not only was the relationship between Stitch and Lilo compromised, but the evolution of Stitch's behavior and the complex dynamic it had with Nani illustrates something much deeper going on behind the scenes. To understand how this intergalactic superweapon adapted to life on Earth and the core secret behind its success, you have to look at the tiny, almost hidden pieces of evidence that evidently show that it is nearly impossible for Stitch to turn morally good. And no, it has nothing to do with Stitch's love for giant monster B-movies. Take a look at some of the evidence sprinkled throughout the movie, starting with the relationship between Stitch and Nani, and the first time he ever witnessed the word Ohana. Nani, in her role as head of the family, really knows and lives by Ohana, doing everything in her power to keep her house and her sister afloat. Lilo and Stitch may have bonded almost instantly, but Nani didn't like it from the beginning, not at all, and she always acted as if she could tell Stitch was onto something shady. She even suggested that Lilo get another dog when they were looking for a pet at the shelter, and by the time they got home from the shelter, Stitch had already wreaked havoc and gotten Nani fired from her job at the luau. Lilo justifies Stitch's grumpiness because it had a long day and it was already bedtime, but Nani didn't buy the little angel act that only Lilo saw in her head, and for good reason too. Take a look at the scene where the word Ohana was said for the first time in front of Stitch. As Stitch continues to wreak havoc in their home, Nani sort of freaks out and gets ready to throw him out of the house, and for good reason. Things were clearly getting out of hand in that scene, but then Lilo steps in and starts to explain the meaning behind Ohana and how it means family and that nobody gets left behind. Nani, who was already opening the door to chuck Stitch out of their house, suddenly stops and calms down. And did you notice Stitch's immediate reaction to the word as well? He had a very interesting response to hearing such an affirmation, and it clearly illustrates his actual intention behind all of his actions going forward in the movie, because it is at this point in the movie where Stitch starts being trained unintentionally. It is at this exact point where Stitch stops fighting and immediately starts hyperactively listening to Lilo's description of the word. His eyes are open like plates. We watch as Stitch goes limp in a dramatic fashion, like a soft pet dangling from Nani's arms, as he acts helpless and feeble in front of the woman who was about to throw him out into unknown territory. But he's not doing it because he's actually scared. He's doing it because behind those pitch black, inextricable eyes, there's a survival mind at work that has been designed to work like a supercomputer. A supercomputer that has now prioritized survival over destruction, and has since associated the word Ohana with that objective. And it is also at this point in the movie that survival becomes the prime directive in the hostile planet that Stitch now sees as inhabited by a simple and unfriendly race. Again, you have to think about what Stitch has learned from its environment. One of its caretakers is ready to throw it out of the house, and the TV teaches it that humans are either prey or foe for monsters like him. As of now, these caregivers are the only thing keeping Stitch alive, based on his perception of Earth and everything that inhabits it. It's not that the word Ohana has some sort of magical attribute that triggers an emotional response in Stitch. The word is something that, according to Stitch's logic, has more power than any of its destructive ways because it directly affects his survival. That being the case, Stitch faces a logic paradox. If Ohana is superior to pure demolition, why should it destroy anything else? The solution for Stitch seems simple. Survival comes first, then the need for destruction. The use of the word and Stitch's adaptation to everything it implies helps it to both survive and execute a directive that overrides the need for destruction. Plus, take a look at the small details Jumba created in Stitch. As mentioned in the movie, Stitch's real name is Experiment 626. Jumba states before the Galactic Council that Stitch/Experiment 626 can think faster than a supercomputer, and its only instinct is to destroy everything it touches. And as a matter of fact, it is nothing but aggression until he hears the word Ohana and learns its meaning for the first time. When Stitch observes this word for the first time, his ability to stop all aggression becomes apparent, and he adopts the so-called affirmation as a trained dog would adopt any other command, except instead of being a command to please its owners, Stitch adopts it as a means of survival. Take a look at the scene later on in the film, when Jumba and Pleakley are getting ready to sleep in the woods. Jumba says, amused, "This little girl is wasting her time." 626 cannot be taught to ignore its destructive programming, as he enjoys the mayhem inside Lilo's house. As Lilo is stubbornly trying to decrease what we would call Stitch's bad habits, Jumba and Pleakley just stated a very clear clear fact, most likely based on solid evidence, seeing as they were the actual creators of Stitch, not Lilo. Because let's not forget, Jumba designed and built Stitch to be a chaos bringer, a mass destruction weapon, if you will. Jumba's rationale and knowledge of Stitch is a lot more advanced than Lilo's, who is simply a child who unknowingly adopted a wild alien and brought it home as a pet. And if you look into the finer details of Stitch's physical makeup, it becomes clear that Jumba's design choices go quite far and further support the impossibility of Stitch actually turning good. According to Stitch's description on Fandom, it was designed to be abnormally strong, virtually indestructible, super intelligent, and very mischievous. He can think faster than a supercomputer, he is fireproof and bulletproof, he can spit acid, can hear in different hearing levels, can see in the dark, can jump really high, can climb up walls and walk on ceilings, and can roll into a ball. Stitch also has super sight and hearing, which conveniently came into play when observing the word Ohana for the first time, and can lift objects 3,000 times his own weight, but not an ounce more. All of these strengths, with his only weakness being water, as he cannot swim due to his molecular density. And being completely realistic and honest about the entirety of Stitch's physical makeup, it's pretty safe to conclude that it was genetically not made to be a pet, let alone something that could even be trained into a pet at the speed at which Lilo seemed to do it in the movie, especially since Stitch was genetically programmed from the start to survive and to kill. With those objectives in place from the beginning, combined with his genetic makeup, it becomes apparent that Stitch really isn't being trained into becoming good. He's being trained to survive in hostile territory. And this leads to another point, Stitch's overall purpose and mission. In another scene, Jumba points out to Pleakley, "This is interesting. 626 was designed to be a monster, but now he has nothing to destroy. You see, I never gave him a greater purpose. What must it be like to have nothing, not even memories to visit in the middle of the night?" Not only does this further support the fact that Stitch wasn't genetically programmed or capable of having any other objective other than to survive and to kill, but it actually brings up an almost invisible piece of evidence that really drives this theory home. Did you notice Jumba's language switch? It's extremely subtle, but very significant, especially regarding the point in time he says this in the movie. He has stopped calling Stitch an it and has started calling him he, and starts to humanize him, so to speak, especially as he ponders the possibility of Stitch finding a new purpose on his own. It's interesting because up to this point, Jumba had always used the pronoun it to refer to Stitch, because again, Stitch was in fact an experiment, a machine, something designed in a lab with those two objectives, to survive and to kill. Having Stitch go from an experiment to an actual being in Jumba's eyes could either mean that Stitch did in fact start to become morally sound, or Jumba failed to notice the training Stitch received from the word Ohana. In a way, he almost seemed to forget Stitch's genetic makeup and projected his own empathy and feelings onto his experiment, while simultaneously forgetting the evidence and the facts to which Stitch was designed and based off. And if you still aren't convinced, let's let Elvis have the final word. As the king eloquently puts it, and ironically enough in the scene where Stitch uses his body as a vinyl disc player to play the song, "We can't go on together with suspicious minds. You're the devil in disguise. Oh yes, you are the devil in disguise. You fooled me with your kisses, you cheated and you schemed. Heaven knows how you lied to me. You're not the way you seemed." With all of this evidence lined up to back up Stitch's real intentions, it's nearly impossible to question if even the directors had used a very specific soundtrack to clue us in that Stitch never changed. At this point, it's the cherry on top. Stitch didn't become good. Nani was right with her suspicions. She saw how Lilo was born and raised into Ohana, but Stitch, it merely adapted to it. Elvis has left the building, ladies and gentlemen, but the real question is this: do you think Stitch actually changed morally after meeting Lilo, or was he programmed to be this way all along? Let us know in the comments down below.